I am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interviewed David Barrett, the CEO of Expensify. David is a lifelong programmer who founded Expensify in 2008 and built it into the most popular pre-accounting platform on the planet. He is recognized as one of the world's top network engineers, having created Expensify's blockchain-powered database a year before Satoshi's white paper on Bitcoin. Prior to Expensify, David led engineering for Red Swoosh, which was acquired by Akami Technologies in 2007, and held various roles in 3D graphics and VR development. When he's not fearlessly leading Team Expensify from Portland, David enjoys playing Minecraft with his daughter. During this episode, David and I talked about how he started programming from the age of 6, which eventually took him on this journey to be the founder of Expensify. David realized through the years that even though he was told he was a math geek, he learned to shut out the noise and realized he had so much more to offer the world by not only believing in his dreams, but also his bigger mission and shutting out the outside noise. This episode is sponsored by Expensify. We are honored that Expensify is sponsoring this episode. They are a payment super app that helps individuals and businesses simplify the way they manage money. More than 12 million people use Expensify's free features, which include corporate cards, expense tracking, next day reimbursement, invoicing, bill pay, global reimbursement, and travel booking, all in one app. To learn more about how Expensify can help save you time to focus on what really matters, check out use.expensify.com/spend management. And the link and all of this information will be in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed this episode. There are so many great lessons from David in my conversation with him. I am sure you are going to share this with the people that you know that can benefit from it. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. I'm very excited to talk to David Barrett from Expensify. And David, before we start, you want to give a little background on yourself and then we'll get into your story.
Sure. So I'm 47, so there's a lot of background, but I guess I'd quickly summarize as I've been a computer programmer since I was 6, did video games and 3D graphics for my jam. Worked in the virtual reality lab at the University of Michigan. I wrote game industry technology for a couple years after college. Then I went into push-to-talk video conferencing, peer-to-peer content distribution. So it's kind of an unlikely background for the expense report magnate that I've become, but it's been kind of a wandering journey and it's gotten me here and I love it.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to get into it. So where did you grow up and what were your parents' occupations? What did they do?
So I grew up orbiting Lake Michigan. So I was born in Michigan, then moved to outside of Chicago, then Wisconsin, and then back to Michigan. And my mom was a nurse and my dad a salesman for selling like giant industrial robots, like these huge arms that would pick up pieces of cars and move them around, things like that. And so he basically sold to the auto industry. And so we kind of just moved around, the Great Lakes region, focusing on that.
Okay. And so did he take you to see these robots? And
I actually only have one memory of that. And it was a great memory because it was this huge robotic arm that would basically go and pick up some, like a car or something like that, set it down, and then it would grab this bucket full of gumballs and then pour it out in a drawer in front of us. And so, that really impressed upon me.
Isn't that amazing what we hold? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So after seeing the robotic arm, so how tell me a little bit, did you have brothers and sisters and what was your childhood like?
I have one brother, and he's 2 years older than me. When we were younger, we looked identical. It was weird. Like we had the same hair, same build basically. And I remember one time I was in the front room with one of my cousins that I would see like, once a year or something like that. And then I was talking to her in the front, and then she walked back to the kitchen and saw my brother there. And she just did this double take. She's like, I was just talking to you. Did you change your shirt? What happened? And but so even though we kind of ended up looking very similar, or at least we did for a while, when we were kids, he just became like full sized super early. So like he became like he's like 6 foot tall, but he got there super early, and so he was this giant, and he was like into skating. So he had chains, leather, skulls, skateboard, long hair, and at the time growing up, skating meant that you were definitely satanic. And now it's like the most wholesome sport in the world, but back then it was basically the mark of the devil.
Right.
And I was just, I liked, I don't know, rainbows, and like, I would wear the t-shirt with some sort of dolphin or something like that. And so we were very, very different personality types.
So you liked rainbows, and what was it about your personality? Like, what were you drawn to when you were younger?
Well, it's
Was it
interesting.
cartoon?
So I guess I'd say, so I mentioned I started programming really young. It's
Uh,
because we lived in the middle of nowhere. And
uh,
so as a result, didn't have anything better to do, basically. I lived just
mm,
like, it's our house. So it's me and my brother. And then we had like one neighbor with no kids. And then it was just farm fields as far as you could see. Like our closest friend was something like a mile. And that's if you cut through all the fields, basically.
right.
So I was very shy. I was smart, but I bad in school because I just didn't care. And so I got a computer really early. I think my dad traded a trailer hitch for it or something like that. I got this VIC 20 computer, and that was my thing. But it was also like now we view computer programmers as like wizards, like, oh, they're building the future. Back then, it was just this oddity. It was basically like viewed as, I don't know, a weird offshoot of math for some reason. Everyone thinks computers have something to do with math. I don't know anything about math. And so, anyway, I was just the weird kid on this computer, and they're like, what is that thing? And
And
like,
I
I
think
remember,
too, it's important for people that are younger. A computer at that time was pretty big.
well, it was
It's like,
yeah, I mean, I would say it was like, I guess, large-ish or something like that.
yeah.
You typically
Okay.
plug your own like you have to bring your own TV and plug into it kind of thing. And so it's so anyway, so for my most of my life, I actually didn't know a single computer programmer, never even met a computer programmer until college. And so the thing that I focused all my time on, I just had absolutely no, this is pre-internet. And so there's like, I just would go to the bookstore and like, I would read a book in the bookstore because I couldn't afford the books, and about programming. And that was my whole thing. And so I'd say my personality was
Find
very
out.
just,
How would you even know what it does or find out about it? Like, why were you fascinated with it?
because I like computer games. And I think it's just like early on, I saw a video game and I'm like, ooh, that's really cool. I want to make that. And then I saw like
Mm.
3D graphics. I'm like, oh, I definitely want to do that too. And then there was this thing called a BBS, which is basically where modems would connect. It's like a website that only one person can access at a time by dialing in. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm going to take video games plus 3D graphics, combine it with modems. That would be cool. Then the internet came out. I'm like, oh, no, screw modems. I want to do internet. That's super cool. And it was just about trying to like make video games, basically. And then I actually made video games like after college and all this sort of stuff. And I realized
Fine.
I spent so much time working on my game that I just didn't even want to play my own game. It felt like such a waste of my time to play my own game. And then I had this epiphany. I'm like, if I can't even justify the time to play my own game, how can I excuse anyone else doing this stuff? Like my success is basically measured by how much time I squander of someone else. And I'm like, that doesn't feel good. And so then I left gaming and then went into much more useful practices.
So, what type of game making?
What type of game making? I'd say was my very first the game I really loved was this game called Ultima 4. It's basically you're looking down from the top, you can see a map, you can walk around and go on adventures and things like this. And so that was like very basic graphics, and so but it was like this huge world that you could explore, and you just get lost in this world for like ages and ages. And then it came out like back in the day, this game called Wolfenstein 3D came out, which was the first game where you could actually like see through your eyes and run around. I'm like, this is mind blowing. And I want to combine Ultima with this, with the internet, and then basically started trying to build like a massively multiplayer role playing game, like back in the day. And then, but the company I ultimately joined was a motorcycle racing simulation. Now, one thing I learned a lot along the way, and this was basically that the game industry is big. The industry for simulations is very small. For motorcycle simulations is basically non-existent. And so I learned an important lesson, and that is it doesn't matter how good your code is. If there are no customers, it just doesn't matter. Like
Mhm.
we worked for years in this game, and basically no one bought it. And I'm like, well, my part I was very proud of. I did my job, but someone else like picking the genre of our game, that was someone else's job, and they screwed that one up. So I'm like, well, that's an important thing. It's like any member of the team can ruin it for everyone else.
So when you were creating this on your own, because it sounds like you were pretty much alone a lot of times if you didn't have a lot of people around you, were you creating like, did video games give you kind of like a community or like
Not
character?
really. I mean, I would say because it didn't have a community because it's just me. Because you could basically build any. The great thing about programming is you can build anything you can imagine. And so as a result, it's so much instant gratification because you sit down in front of a computer and you control every single variable, and you quickly learn that everything is your fault. Like if something doesn't go right, it's because you programmed it wrong. There's nowhere else to blame. And so it drives a lot of accountability, but also there's so much pride when you have something that comes out. You're like, wow, this is amazing. And I did this. It wouldn't exist if it weren't for me. So I think it's a really exciting field because it's so creative. And I think it's interesting. It's not perceived as a creative, like programming is, again, people see it like it's math. Like there's nothing creative about that. That's not real art. I'm like, I disagree. I think it is extraordinarily complicated and beautiful art.
Yeah. But I do think, and so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I've worked in a number of tech companies and met with programmers on trying to get different features built, and so
Hmm.
from the accountant side, I was going in and saying, we need this or so forth, so forth. And I would sometimes have a hard time for them to understand what they were building. Like they were very much about the programming,
Hmm.
but like there was one instance in particular that I was like, after years, I was like, it's the issue. So I brought customers into a program where there were computer programmers, and I
Hmm.
had them explain how they're using the software and what it's solving for them and talking about different features that are important to them and why.
Yeah.
And when they left, I talked to the programmers and they were like, I didn't even know that's what I built. I didn't know like that's what I
Yeah.
actually did on the other side. So there's got to be people that just like the math and the programming. And then there's the people that like the creative visioning of programming. I mean, you can tell me because I'm not a programmer, but that was
Sure.
shocking for me.
So actually, that's incredibly common where like up until Expensify, I had never built anything that was for me. It's like basically most of your job is building something for someone else. It's building some like I don't know some tool that someone who isn't you is going to use. It's like I'm not an accountant, but I build tools for accountants, and so you have to imagine basically this entirely different job in order to do your job, and that's quite hard. And so I'd
Yeah.
say I view that as kind of like I think of like the imagination gap, basically. When you're trying to describe an idea to someone, in your mind, you've got this really powerful, amazing, sophisticated thing that took you years to figure out. And then you condense it down to like 100 words that you communicate to someone else. And then they expand that into something else that's completely different, which isn't actually what you have in mind at all. But it's hard to know that because there's a limit to what they're able to imagine, and there's a limit to how effectively you can communicate what you're imagining. And so I think
Mhm.
that's really tough. Like that's why I think it's so effective to bring in people who've lived the job, who can tell stories about it, make it real, show it in the practice, because it helps someone imagine what you're trying to do. Even
Mhm.
if you correctly described it, if they don't have the context to understand the words that you used, it
Yeah.
didn't actually come through. It didn't land. Like what you said is not necessarily what they heard, but what they
Right.
heard is what they're going to build. And sometimes what they hear is nonsense. So like that doesn't make any sense, but like whatever, you're the client, and then they build it for you, and you're like, this isn't what I want. They're like, I don't know. I said I thought you wanted.
Right. So it's interesting because I think it's the same thing. Like I went into accounting because I was kind of made to go into accounting in
Okay.
my but what I really wanted to do was be in art. And there was a period of time, and it was a while back, where I was trying to figure out like, do I want to stay in this area, this profession, or do I want to like go back to school and try what this would be? And I there's like a top design school in Ohio. And so I went, and the dean was talking, and I was like, this is exactly what happens in tech companies all the time because I went for fashion design. I wanted to see what it would be like to do that. And he was talking about that designers, come into the field because they get to create anything that they want, but you really don't. You are there to serve the needs of your
Mm,
customer who's coming to you. And someone's got to be that intermediary communicator that understands both sides,
yeah.
because like how someone thinks that's the person that needs the happening for. It's like fantastic project he was talking about where they went out to another school and for them to solve a problem. And they went to the medical school and they said, what do you want the fashion designers to solve for you? And what they said was, when people put on a hospital gown, they get sicker. So design a hospital gown that someone doesn't feel sicker. And I was
Oh,
like,
interesting.
that's fantastic, right? Like,
Yeah.
like that's really exciting. But someone has
Huh.
to like, you don't go into fashion design thinking you're going to be designing hospital gowns, right? Like
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
thinking
That's
like
not the dream.
runways and yeah, but you're like trying to solve different. And I think computer programming is the same situation where you're trying to solve other people's issues and then interpret it so that you solve that, which is really hard.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely agree. I think that so much of it is trying to, put yourself into the shoes of the client. But I would say that's why the most fun as a programmer is when you're scratching your own itch, when you're building a problem, when you're solving a problem that you've personally experienced. And I think
Mhm.
that's a really exciting time because then you don't have to talk to anyone. You can just start just building what you need. And you're like, look, at least there's one person on the planet that would like this. And then if odds are you're actually not that special. And so if you like it, probably other people will. Now that'll only get you so far, but at least it'll get you to a start.
Yes, exactly. So, okay, so let's talk about your journey. So you went to college for computer programming. Is that what you said?
So yeah, I went to University of Michigan, and I got a degree in computer engineering there.
And
But it was like
how did you
my
feel
biggest
about
regret. I hated it actually, because I think going to college for computer programming is just the dumbest thing in the world. Like it was then, and it absolutely is today, because there's nothing you can't learn with just an internet connection in your basement. Like, and you can learn it so much better by yourself. Now, I'm not going to say this is true for all fields, but when it comes to computer programming, there's a very strong inverse correlation between how long you spent in school and how useful you are as an engineer. It's like basically if you didn't go to school at all, you're probably great. If you only went for like a bachelor's degree, yeah, you can recover from that. Master's starts to get tricky. If you have like a PhD in computer science, man, that's tough because you've just learned so much of the wrong thing that has to be unlearned. And so I'd say no. I think computer programming I mean, the internet is designed by programmers for programmers to teach people how to program. There's so many good resources out there.
So that's really interesting because basically you're saying it's like the street smarts that you start like if you're passionate enough about it, you're going to want to be tinkering and playing and trying to develop these things on your own without being taught.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that so at Expensify we talk about there's three major core qualities, and one of the first of these qualities is talent, and talent being the ability to learn without being taught and then teach others what you know. A talented
Mhm.
person just kind of absorbs knowledge from all around them and then
Mhm.
condenses it down and shares it with others. And so I think that the problem is schools don't teach talent. They teach you how to learn in like the worst, least efficient possible way. And so I'd say the key is learning how to learn, and that's not something that schools teach you.
Yes. So when you left there, what did you end up doing when you graduated?
So I was towing between two different companies, like a bigger, more established company in Chicago, and then this tiny little game startup in Texas. Um, I went with the Texas company, which is a disaster. The Chicago company actually ended up being called Bungie. They did Halo and basically all of the major video games the past couple decades. So I, picked the road less traveled, I would say. And it was, but I'd say the advantage of it is I was put in way over my head. I was given responsibilities that were far, far beyond, what I was really qualified for. But it was incredibly educational. Now, that company, of course, did fail utterly, like basically every other company I've been with in my career prior to Expensify. But in the process of its failure, it was a very good lesson for me.
And what was the lesson? Like, do you think some of the lessons of just being with a startup helped you at Expensify?
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, I would say like basically all of my startups, all the companies that I was with before failed utterly, but not even for like creative reasons. Like they just failed doing the same stupid stuff and stuff that people knew was bad while it was happening. Like it's so common to be in a company and be like, gotta do this thing. It's not gonna work, but what can you do? You do it. It's like, yep, didn't work. Told you. And it's like who won? Like, what was that even about? And so yeah, I was just my career was largely about seeing how not to do it, which is like pretty instructive.
Hmm.
But also I would say there's a lot of lessons along the way. And for me with the game company, and the biggest lesson was like, so I was a very good programmer, and so I was the kind of guy I would go in, they'd like have an idea, I'd be like, I can build that. I would stay up all night. I had a sleeping bag under my desk that I used a lot. And then basically in the morning I'd show it off and I'd be like, check it out. They're like, oh, that's cool, but what about this? I'm like, great idea. Throw it all out, rewrite it all night. And so like I was very, very good in that. There was this other programmer, probably not even as good a programmer as me, honestly, but he would go and ask everyone. He'd be like, so what should we do? And I'd be like, oh, we should do this. I'm like, okay, he'd write that down. He'd walk to the next person. What do you need? Write that down. Go around everyone. Write a document. He's like, hey, I wrote this document. Does this accurately describe what you need? Go around. And then he would just write it once and it would come out and it'd be perfect. He did not have a sleeping bag under his desk. Um, and I'm like, ooh, man, I'm really doing this wrong. That doesn't really make, I mean, like my method is clearly a bad method. And that's where I kind of concluded that, C++ might be a great programming language, but English is even better. Like the ability to communicate with others about the requirements of what you're doing is the most important thing. And I just wasn't prioritizing it at all. And so actually, when I left that company, I decided to get a job as a technical writer. And so actually, which is a very weird career path. And so I dropped basically engineering. I've been like programming for 21 years at that point. Is that right? No, maybe like less next. That's probably 21. Who knows? Anyway, for most of my life, my entire. And then I applied for a technical writing job, which technical writing is interesting. There's no technology whatsoever for the role. It's basically like, an English major would apply for this. And so as a result, I was going to these jobs. They're like, wow, you were really overqualified for this job. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm just here to write user manuals. And so I took this job just writing engineering specifications on one side, user manuals on the other. And I realized just if you do both of those, you bookend the entire project. Like you write the user manual in such a fashion that really there's only one way to build it. And then people just build it that way without even telling them how to build it because you just made it so obvious that that's how it needed to be built. And so, yeah, I would say that was a big lesson coming out of it was just the importance of good communication. And going back to this point about the imagination gap, it's so hard to build the right thing if people can't agree on what it is. And it's not like if people even know to start. It's not like someone can just tell you build X because they don't have X in their mind as to what makes sense. You have to go back and forth and iterate and collaborate and all this. And so I think that's where I learned the importance of just like collaborating in a written form because like writing is like evidence, like it's tangible evidence of thought. It's like, you can sit around and talk all day with people and
Right.
walk out and like, yeah, we're aligned, but then no one actually agrees on anything. You have to write it
Right.
down before anyone actually knows what they're agreeing upon.
Yeah. And gain agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think that happens all the time as we think communication happens. Even when we
Yeah,
say,
absolutely.
even when people don't like they don't understand.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Agreed.
it's easier to respond in writing to say this is the point versus having to face someone and say I don't truly understand.
Well, yeah. And also what's nice about writing is it's asynchronous. And in this world of like,
Mhm.
so Expensify has employees all around the world. So the sun never sets in the Expensify empire. And so there's always some conversation happening. And it's always a cool conversation on like something important. And if you collaborate in real time, then it means you can only collaborate with people in your time zone. But if you collaborate through writing, basically through documentation, and through like, asynchronous chat and so forth, you can engage a truly global sort of conversation. It's a
Mhm.
very different style though, because you have to write it down, which means you have to think about what you're going to say recognizing that if someone's going to read it 12 hours from now, it has to stand on its own. And so everyone has to be a good communicator in writing, because being a good communicator orally actually only gets you so far.
And that's kind of interesting. That probably expands into social media of why communities can be built globally, because
Mm.
that's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way. So where was the leap to start Expensify? How did that happen?
So I went through a few different companies, game industry, a game company, this kids company or something. I never even figured out what it was. It just didn't make any sense at all. And then I did technical writing for the like 1 hour into this company. I'm like, this is the dumbest technology ever. But I'm like, doesn't matter. I'm here to write user manuals. I'm not assessing that. But I'm like, this company is going to fail for this reason, and then later it failed for that reason. And went through a couple companies like that. And that was another challenging lesson, was realizing that being right also doesn't matter if you're not convincing. Like I remember I had this CTO. He was like a nemesis. He was wrong 100% of the time on every major decision in ways that were completely obvious to me that I called, and didn't matter because everyone paid attention to him. No one paid attention to me. Company failed. And I was like, wow, this guy's so good at running things to the ground, and walking away scot free. Like, but still, it was never like his fault to others. Even though I'm like, well, that was clearly going to happen. So there's a lot of important lessons along the way. So I started Expensify actually when I joined a small company called Red Swoosh. It did peer-to-peer content distribution, which is kind of like BitTorrent, but for legitimate content. So, smaller customer base or smaller user base, because you're not dealing with piracy, but, more profitable because you're not getting like sued to oblivion either. Um, and so we got acquired, a very small company, 6 people or something like that. We got acquired. I had some money in my pocket, not a ton, but more than I've had. And I was walking around. I lived in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, and so basically, when I walked to work, I'd walk by the same basically people on the street every single day. And I'm thinking like, look, I can't solve hunger globally or even in the city, but I have the resources to ensure that the people I see every day on the street can get a hot meal. Like that's within my power. But it's just so like inconvenient to do. Like trying to actually like support people on a daily basis. And it's very like, you could try to bring them into McDonald's, which is very, very confusing and awkward. I'd give out like gift cards, but like, gift certificates, but it's like a $10 gift card for like a $7 value meal. It's not very efficient. And so I'm like, oh, what if I took this gift card, and I had no money on it, and I had a stack in my pocket? I could hand them out, such that in the millisecond when the card was swiped, I could load the exact amount of money onto that card so that it'd be used for that meal. And then also I could limit it to only work at restaurants that don't serve alcohol, and only once a day for only up to $10 a day. I'm like, yeah, I could build something like that, like a private food stamps card, basically. And so I went to the banks with this idea, and they're just like, "What? No, no. What are you talking about? That is just. It's like you're just going to give out money. Like, where's the business in that? Like, it was KYC and so, money laundering and PCI. Do you know what any of these acronyms mean? They're like, this is so much work. What are you talking about? They're like, no, it's too weird, too risky. I'm out. I'm like, oh, yeah, I need to sound low risk. And it's boring. Like, what is the most boring application of these cards I can come up with? And I'm like, aha, expense reports. That's literally how I got into it. Was I took that same exact technology, went back to those banks. I'm like, figure out all that. And now I'm going to do, it's called Expensify, the corporate card for the masses. And basically you take this card, and business owners can give these cards out to their employees. Employees can use them to spend up to a certain amount of day, certain money per day, frequency per day at certain merchant types. And then all the purchases are routed back to the business owner so they can keep all the miles. Same exact technology they wanted basically for my food stamps card, except just presented in a business context. And everyone's like, oh, that sounds safe and boring. And I hate my expense reports too. And so in the process of trying to make basically this food stamps card, I just had to invent the story of Expensify because I needed to sound credible to like all these banking partners. And they were like, so tell me about this expense reporting company. I'm like, it does all the stuff you'd expect it would do. And like, oh, do you reimburse through ACH? I'm like, never heard those letters before, but absolutely we do that. It's like, they're like the iPhone comes out. They're like, oh, do you support the iPhone? I'm like, absolutely. Mind you, I didn't have an iPhone, and the iPhone didn't even have an app store when it launched. But I'm like, definitely. They're like, what does your iPhone app do? I'm like, everything you'd think it would do. which is, and they're like, does it, I don't know, scan receipts? I'm like, yes, obviously it scans receipts. Even though at the time the iPhone, the camera was so bad, you if you took a picture of a receipt, you just couldn't even read. Like you couldn't read it. It's so blurry and terrible. Um, and I just made up, just kept saying yes to everything. Does it connect to QuickBooks? Absolutely. Never use QuickBooks. Don't know anything about it. And so I just said yes to everything. Um, but in the end, I had a pretty good pitch for this fictional company. Um, and and then one day the economy collapsed. I lost all my savings, and I'm like, fuck. And now I need to actually do something. And they're like, well, how about I just build this company that everyone thinks is pretty cool? And then the next day, like iPhone came out with an app store and it got an autofocus camera. So now you could actually take like crystal clear receipt images. And I was the only company out there pitching receipt scanning for a mobile platform that didn't have an app store and a phone that didn't take pictures. And then suddenly they get both. And then so basically we became the very first expense reporting mobile app. We're the very first to do any sort of integrated receipt scanning, the first to do credit card import. And we sort of just stumbled into the entire thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Were you able to still fulfill what you wanted to do for the homeless?
So yeah, so eventually we came back and we said, okay, now every time you swipe the card, we get a little bit of interchange. We take a bit of that. It goes to a nonprofit we created called Expensify.org. It's on a bunch of different campaigns all over the place. Some around hunger. I'd say probably our most successful is actually it's a SNAP campaign in the sense that if you have a food stamps card and use an ETF card or a SNAP benefit card, whatever you want to call it, it'll show that on the receipt when you make a purchase with it. And then so you can, then we said, hey, scan your, during when COVID happened, we said, scan your receipt for your bag of groceries. If it's bought with a SNAP card, we'll just pay you back. So you can go buy another one. And so we did basically food assistance to thousands of families throughout the pandemic.
That's
Um,
cool.
we're actually coming out with a new campaign in just like, I don't know, a week here that's really focused on teachers because so it's actually extremely common that teachers will actually pay out of pocket to help students in need. It's so common. There's actually an IRS. You probably know this. There's already an IRS deduction specifically for teachers to pay out of pocket to help kids. And so we're going to be basically saying, "Hey, teacher, scan your receipt, get your principal to approve it, and then we will pay you back half." Basically, just doubling the money for teachers who are already heroes out there, basically taking care of kids. And so, yeah, Expensify.org has been helping. It has a bunch of different campaigns. It's been going on for years, and it's growing and growing.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that's so important to understand like a bigger purpose behind the company. So I love that story. So going back to getting this started, you're a one-man show, great programmer, starting a business. What was that like? Because that takes you into a whole nother side of you that you probably haven't explored. That's you're gonna not only have to please when you eventually have investors, but also people that work for you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'd say it's pretty interesting, definitely. And so because again, when I started programming, it was just this weird offshoot of math, and so I was always told you're like a math geek. That's how I was categorized basically by everyone, and I never actually even imagined to myself starting a business. I was never told I could. I never thought I could. I was like, oh, business that's different. That's like sales and marketing and this finance. Do you know what that word means? And I'm like, I don't. And so I just assumed it was hard. I assumed it was just beyond my skills. I'm like, okay, I'll just stay in my lane, whatever.
Uh-huh.
But having gone through enough failed businesses, I'm like, if these idiots can do it, like I think I can too. Um, and again, I didn't even plan on starting a business. Didn't plan on starting Expensify either. I just stumbled into it, and I just had to because I got fired and the economy because initially I was doing it on the side, like just nights and weekends sort of thing. And then I lost my job right when the economy collapsed and all my savings were wiped out. So it was just out of
Was this
necessity.
like
I just
2008 time
Yeah,
period?
something like that. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So it was pretty daunting, but I think I'd learned a lot kind of along the way. And like one, I'd say important lesson I learned was that you should never share an idea before it's ready. Because like
Mhm.
I think my instincts for a long time, whenever I had an idea, I was always an idea person. I always wanted to like, I could build this, whatever it is. And all my
Mhm.
friends were always like, lame. It's been tried, didn't work. Here's why it's going to fail. Boom, boom, boom. Like,
Right.
look, I'm just trying to help you out, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like so demoralizing. And then I realized eventually, like,
Yeah.
why am I even talking to these people? Like, why do I think they have some like I've thought a ton about this, and I share this idea, and then in 2 seconds, why do I think they're going to have better ideas than it took me years to come up with? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So when I started Expensify, I didn't tell anyone for like a year. Actually, I've been working on it full time for like a year. The only person I knew was my girlfriend. Um, and then the very first person outside of that I told was the person who became my co-founder. And then we didn't tell anyone for another year until we actually launched a product, a functioning product at like a conference called TechCrunch 50. Um, and but I'd say one of the advantages
Your
is
co-founder too.
he's another programmer. So he's an unusual guy, former professional hockey player in Poland.
Oh.
And I remember when I interviewed him for my previous company, he was like, oh, no, actually, when I was making the pitch for Expensify, he's like, I don't know. I could do Expensify, or I'm thinking about buying a liquor store. And he like really went through basically like a liquor store, shelf stable product, very reliable clientele, and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm like, wow, that's the balance. He was like the cheapest guy I ever met. Um, but he was also an incredible programmer and like a great guy. And so it's basically like, man, I'm competing with a liquor store, but also I'm like, wow, that liquor store sounds like a pretty good business, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
anyway, but he joined here, so
So
it's great.
before you move on, I do want to hold on this concept of negativity,
Hmm.
because it is a mindset that our brains naturally go to, and I think it's very hard when you're a visionary or you're thinking of these ideas that the normal human experience is to go back and think about failures,
Hmm.
and those failures get in your way of trying new things, or people don't want to fail again or look bad or feel bad, and so they'll get in their way, or we'll have this talk to kind of stop putting ourselves out there again. So what do you think influenced you or was within you to stay positive? Because you have, in your story, have had a lot of negative experiences that have happened in your career so far, right? So how did
Sure.
that still give you hope when you have people telling you no, but in your head you're like, no, I believe this can work?
Good question. Yeah, probably a few different things. One thing that comes to mind, I would say, on the concept of like dealing with rejection and failure. And I think a challenge is that like, success and failure look exactly the same right up to the very end. It's basically like until you're a clear success, you're a presumed failure. And I think it's a real challenging thing to kind of just accept. But I think that what I learned is I have a lot of control over how I define success. And because and I think I trace it back to, oddly enough, so back in college, um, on my very first day of college, I actually met this girl. We dated for like 3 years. And then we broke up right before the summer before senior year. And so I had an internship at Intel. I was 21. I was going out to California and I had money for the first time and I was single. And so I remember actually just walking around downtown, Folsom, California. And I'm like, I want to ask someone out, but you know what? Girls are scary. And so I was thinking like, yeah, I don't want to be turned down. Like that sucks. But I realized like, but I don't have any control over that. Like what they say is up to them. The only thing I can control is asking them out. And so I'm just going to change my mindset here and basically define it as success in my mind is asking them out. And then whatever happens after that is just gravy. And so I had this epiphany. I looked up and standing in front of me was this super hot skater chick, way out of my league, someone I would have never asked out before. And I just said, it's like, hey, want to get a bottle of wine? And she's like, okay. And I'm like, oh my God, it's that easy? This whole time? I thought it was this hard. And so, and I realized at that moment that you have so much control over how you frame success, and it requires no one's permission. You just do it. You don't even have to tell anyone. You just have to believe it. And I think that always carried through with me. And so when it came to starting a startup, for me, the most important thing wasn't how many customers I had. It wasn't any of that stuff. It was basically like, was I still trying? Had I given up yet? It was basically my measure of success is like, am I still at it? And the way I measured that actually was I tracked my hours. Now this is, for accountants, very common. For programmers, not really. I wasn't billing anyone. There's no reason to track my hours. But for me, I basically said, I want to live a good life, but I also basically want to get done. And so I said, I think I'm going to work 50 solid hours a week. Some people work more, a lot work less. I was like, no, I think 50 is a good number. If I can maintain 50 on-task focused hours per week, I'm going to feel good about whatever comes out. But I'm only going to put down an hour if I believed I really worked that out. And then so every day, it's real simple. Have a spreadsheet, 2 columns. First is date. Second is how many hours did you try your best to work this day? No one looks at it. It's just for you. So there's no reason to lie. And the only right answer is, do you believe that number? Like if you're like distracted, you're like, I was kind of distracted at that hour. Okay, well, how distracted? 50% distracted? Cool. Just cut it in half then. Just put it down. Doesn't matter. And then so basically I would do this. And it was basically like, it's like when you work for yourself, it's so paralyzing because you can go anywhere and do anything. It's like imagine, you're in a desert at high noon and all you see are sand dunes in every direction all around you. And it's like, great, which way you want to go? It's like, I have no idea. They all look fine. And so, but if you just change that exercise such that you can see footsteps coming all the way over the horizon, standing to right where you are, and like, okay, well, I've been walking this direction. I guess I'm going to keep going that direction. Just by adding an analysis of your own history, it makes a decision that was just impossible. It just makes it trivial. And so I think for me, it was about just like, I want to measure my footsteps. Am I actually moving somewhere and doing something? And I actually don't even know where I'm going, but so long as I'm moving, I'm going to be happy with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that was my attitude through this entire thing. I'm like, I'm going to do this food stamps card. Oh, that doesn't work. I'm just going to do this fake expense reporting company. Oh, yeah, that didn't work. And I'm going to do a real expense reporting company. And I was never committed too much to the outcome. I was just committed to the journey itself. And I think that, and I was just trying to please myself. Now, luckily, I was in a programming field, was able to like make it all work. But for years, I had nothing to show for it except for a spreadsheet full of numbers.
Did you care? Like, was it valuable hours? Because I think people, definitely have this mindset of like, am I really contributing? Is my work meaningful to me? But they don't actually assess. There might be things within your day that were more meaningful to you than you thought if you notice them. And we don't necessarily take that beat or pause in our day to notice. It's coming at us all day. And that makes us be more aware of our choices.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so when it comes to hiring, as we talk about these qualities, one I talked about was talent, the ability to learn without being taught and teach what you know. I think the second is what we call ambition, like having an actual goal for your life and some evidence that you've worked towards it. And I'd say because like, if you ask anyone, it's like, do you want to do something amazing with your life? Everyone's going to be like, hell yeah, I do. And you ask them, cool, what specific amazing thing do you want to do with your life? And they'll be like, oh, I have no idea. I've literally never even thought of it. And so I think that ambition is about taking the time to actually visualize your life. Like, again, I think one of the helpful parts about it, if you can see the footsteps that got you where you are, you can kind of forward project where you're going. You're like, okay, right. I'm walking this direction. I've been going this direction. Do I like where that goes? Mm-hmm. And ambition is about trying to actually think about where am I going and do I want to go there? And if not, I'm going to start making adjustments today to shift that path. Maybe it's a slow shift, but I need to take it somewhere else if I want to get someplace else. And so I think ambition is about paying attention and taking your own future seriously and taking ownership over that future.
Yeah. And Zach was on from your company and we were talking about this Zach. DJ. He actually brought up this question that you asked him during his interview and he couldn't answer it. And so I think that's important that sometimes you can't answer it. Like I remember like in my career, I was very driven toward becoming a partner in a CPA firm. Didn't know why, but that was just like type A personality, want to achieve that, right? And there was a point in, I was at a company and I was good friends with my manager. And I would realize like I would get these reviews and like 99% of the review would be great. and 1% would be like feedback that I didn't like. And then I'd be all bent out of shape over that 1%, right? And they'd be giving me what I asked for and whatever. And she stood back one time and was like, "What would make you happy?" Which is kind of like this
Mm,
question you're asking. And I don't know. That was the first time in my life so there's a difference between having career goals and knowing what would make you happy. Like, because sometimes
mm,
you're doing things that you don't even realize is not making you happy. And I realized at that moment, I could not answer her question, which was
mm.
really weird for me because I thought I always, like, I am ambitious, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And I think Zach said the same thing. When you asked him that question, he didn't know what that is. But as he's played around on the side with this DJ and this hobby's become more and more of a love. And, if you get into his story with his hockey playing and, we kind of like drew on all of that, like it drew into like the skill he has of like practice, practice, practice until you're achieving this dream. But you wouldn't even, it's like kind of what you said of like you have to be open to possibility of what's
Yeah.
ahead of what. So it's like that as long as you're open to like achievement, sometimes you don't know that answer right away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think having a diversity of these goals is important, like
Yeah.
different timelines and so like, we like to say at Expensify, we want to accomplish three things. We want to live rich, we want to have fun, we want to save the world.
Mhm.
And I love the bombastic phrasing of all of those. And so we like
Yeah.
living rich is basically, let's make sure that your every average boring day is awesome. Like you wake up in a comfortable bed with like, a million thread count sheets. You are with someone you love, you have a great breakfast. You go to work, you're inspired, you're challenged, you're working with people that you enjoy, but you come home and you have time and resources to spend with the people you love, doing the project on the side. And then every day, every boring average day is just awesome. Like that's what we call like living rich. Second is having fun, which is like not like Xbox fun, but like bucket list fun. Like ideally at any point in time, you should always be like, oh man, that thing we just did once in a lifetime. That was amazing. And that thing we're just about to do, that's also going to be amazing and once in a lifetime. You should always be between two bucket list entries, I would say. That's what I think is having fun. And then both of those, if you're doing that, if you're like, every day is awesome, you're also doing like, you're making rapid progress through your bucket list of like doing cool stuff all the time, then I think you get into the mindset to think like, my life is very full, but how do I make it better? And that's where I think giving back starts to become a real priority because saving the world isn't like, just like most people, I'd say they view it as like the best they can even think about is like, I just try not to make it worse. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, you know what? I feel bad that I exist, but I do. And so I'm just going to try to minimize my impact and I'm just going to call that a day. Like that's the best I could do. Or like some people are like, I'm just going to do my part. And it's just like, even though it's like, I'm going to recycle, even though basically all evidence shows recycling is bad for the environment for so many obvious ways. Or like there's a bunch of this virtue signaling that we do because it's like, I know it doesn't matter, but it makes me look good.
Makes me feel,
Um,
yeah.
and I think like if you actually want to make a difference, like it's hard. It actually requires sustained effort, creativity, resources, and time. And the only way you'll get into a mindset that you're going to apply that level of focus is if your life is awesome. And if you're already having super fun, then you will start to think about like, okay, what would it take to save the world? What kind of sacrifices do I need to make in the long run? And how can I maintain that over the long haul with the right people? I think Expensify is all about trying to find that collection of people, get them into that mind space where they're actually willing to put the effort into saving the world, and then equip them with the resources to do so.
But what do you do when things aren't going well in your life? Like you can't, uncontrollables happen in your
Yeah.
life, and every day's not going to be your best day. So how do you
Uh,
still?
yeah. That's why I think you gotta, kind of put on your own mask before helping others. I'm
Mhm.
like, fundamentally, I think it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy. I don't think that you can realistically get into a save the world mindset if you're struggling at home.
Mhm.
And so I think first is taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, taking care of your local community. I think it's like you kind of work up towards it.
Mhm.
Um, and I think also there's kind of like an escapism to like international news. We will obsess about what's happening on the other side of the planet and then ignore the problems on our doorstep. Because I think it's actually a way to, it's like I'm engaged. I'm a global citizen. I care about this issue over there, and that makes me a good person, and it excuses not caring about the person around me. Like it's easier to care about something you have no influence over because no one expects you to do anything than to
Right.
actually care about something in front of you because then you kind of feel obligated to act.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, as far as you as a leader and being able to kind of come up with all these concepts and ways of running your culture, because it is you definitely run a very alternative culture.
Yes,
And that isn't necessarily something that if you were taking investment on as a tech company, that I'm sure you've had to fight through a lot of the things that you do to justify it
absolutely.
and make sure that they are willing to invest money for you to do those things with your people, like having the month where you all are working in another country and you
Hmm.
do a lot of extreme things. So how did you get to that point or had people on the way that have helped influence that mindset or belief in how you run a company?
Well, first, I would say that assumes that we're asking investors to fund this stuff, and I would say that's not going to work. That's why we got profitable super early. So it's
Hmm.
like we're not funded by investors; we're funded by customers.
Hmm.
And customers don't care what we do so long as we do give them a good product. We don't have to prove we prove ourselves through the product that we deliver,
Hmm.
not through some philosophical rant.
Hmm.
And so I would say, yeah, I think fundamentally it's about I mean, it sounds so basic. And that's why I kind of come back to the question, how do you run a business? I think most of it is just don't do the stupid stuff. Don't do anything you don't think is going to work, which sounds so obvious, but almost everyone is doing stuff on a daily basis that they think is dumb, but they just keep doing it anyway. So it's like, just don't do the dumb stuff. And so one of the basics is like, I don't know, first, build a good product. Second, have a sizable market. Third, sell it at a fair price, or like get close to your customers and make sure they like you. Like things like this. It's just like, I don't know, it's just very, very basic, but we take those basics quite seriously. And so you know, we have to have a functioning business, and it has to be a good, sustainable, growing business for us to do all this other stuff. And
Hmm.
if your business is suffering, you got to basically get back to the core. You maybe got to dial back some of the fun stuff for a while and make sure that you're taking care of the foundation of it all. And so
Hmm.
it ebbs and flows. It's like I'd say it's also about like not having too tight a grip on things, and recognizing that again, it's about the journey, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But you got to enjoy it along the way. Take the time, especially when you can take the time, and then like double down at the times that you can't. And it's very, very dynamic, and making sure people are on board for kind of a bumpy journey.
Yeah. And that's part of the interviewing process, right? Of like being brutally honest about this might be different than what you have experienced
Yeah,
before.
yeah. But I think that we found that it's like Expensify is great for a certain type of person, and it sucks for everyone else. And like basically, I talked about talent, talked about ambition, and the third and the most challenging is humility. Basically, like a genuine appreciation for the ideas of others. And I'd say like humility is the toughest one to interview for. Like talent's easy; you just do testing and you can figure out basically what they know. Ambition's challenging, but we have ways to figure out basically like what is your actual goal in life. Humility is the hardest because anyone can basically keep their shit together for like an interview or a month or a year or a couple of years. But eventually the real you comes out. And I'd say if someone has an epic problem or flames out in the company, it's not because of talent. It's not because of lack of mission generally. It's usually because they reveal over the time. It's like, actually, I never really agreed with that thing. I didn't say anything, but now I'm feeling comfortable. I'm finally comfortable to say it. And it's like, man, you should have said it from the start.
Right.
Um, and so humility, it's like, so talent, ambition, humility. If you have those three, you are going to succeed in life. Nothing will stop you. Um, if you don't have those three, you're just going to struggle for a variety of reasons. And so we're only looking for people that have those three conditions. And then we stand back and say, great, you're just going to be a superstar. And we're just here to help you on your journey and then we'll all just try to align our journeys together. And Expensify is just kind of the Venn overlap of whatever everyone wants to do in their lives. And then we just kind of like, okay, well, I want to do this. Like, I want to go, you know, I want to go to Vancouver. Oh, I want to go to Portland. I want to go to Seattle. Cool. There are different destinations, but they're all north. And so we can all basically kind of take the same path for as long as that path aligns. And it turns out that it doesn't really matter what you want to do. Odds are it overlaps 90% with what other people want to do. And so that's why we don't really have any bosses. No one reports to anyone because we're trying to get an environment where everyone feels like they're working for themselves, pursuing their own dreams and own ambitions alongside others that are just there voluntarily.
Yeah. Love it. I can keep talking to you. We've got to take some of this and wrap it up. There's so many great stories here. So, anything that we didn't cover, you want to make sure people walk away from this conversation with?
I don't know. I would say so. If it's a bit about mindset and basically trying to live a good life, I think it's on you to figure out what that good life is. And no one asks you that. Like, how much time did you spend yesterday thinking about your long-term journey? Probably nothing. Like, how much time today? Probably also nothing. And tomorrow's probably going to be the same. And I think most people go through their lives, their entire lives, and never stop to think, what am I trying to do with this? Like, and imagine you were reading a book about your life. Would you read that book? Is that an interesting book? But like, people have interesting lives. Anyone can do it. And I'm sure there are incredibly interesting lives out there by people who are starting from a way worse place than you are right now. And so if they can do it, you can probably do it too. And the big difference is they started, like they tried. They decided to do something exciting with their lives. And then they started deciding what that is. And then just started doing it. And I think you can do it too, but it's on you to figure that out.
Yeah, love it. Well, this has been an amazing conversation as usual. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with our listeners. And I'm sure there's going to be many things that people take away from this.
Great. Hey, well, thanks so much for asking. It's been a real pleasure.
And now for my mindful moments with my conversation with David. It was so fascinating to hear how David thinks and how he has evolved over his career and growing up. And we talked about the fact that he started computer programming at 6 years old, and he got his first computer from his father. And because of that, he really started working on programming very early and started trying to figure out video games and 3D graphics and wanted to combine video games with this experience of 3D and wanted to create adventures and experiences for people that were a part of these video games. Now, one of the really interesting things that came from that discussion was that through all of this programming that David was doing and all of the fascination he had in creation, he actually didn't want to play his own games. And over time, he really started realizing that there was something bigger that he wanted to do with all of this if he wasn't willing to play his own games. And so there was a great lesson that he said in this is that it doesn't matter how good your code is if no one cares about it and there's no customers. So one of those things are making sure you know who your target market is and understanding who are the people that you are serving with whatever product and service that you're creating. But also that it's not just about you. It's about making sure that there is some value that you're creating by what you do that's bigger than yourself. And sometimes we can get away from that because we're so driven in our own goals that we're not thinking outside of ourselves. And one of the examples he was talking about was this company that he had joined that was motorcycle simulation games, that he just loved the product, but really understood once he started getting into it that there was a very, very small market between who would actually want to use that product and be interested in it. So even though you might think something is really, really interesting, then you have to figure out if someone else cares and that you're solving a problem that someone is experiencing or a desire that somebody wants. So we also talked about just the skill of computer programming. And he was talking about over time, he just realized that the more people went to school for computer programming, there was an inverse correlation between how useful they were as a computer programmer. And it's not necessarily true of any profession, but what I would say is that if you aren't passionate about what you do and willing to do it when you're not getting paid or wanting to learn more beyond the job that you're in, you actually become less useful. You can be technically knowledgeable, but that street smart, that real world experience, the other things that you can offer because this skill is something that's so interesting to you, becomes something that makes you more valuable in the future. So it is really important to think about that what you do, you want to make sure that you enjoy it outside of work, outside of school, that you want to continue to learn and grow, and that it has something in the future for you. The other thing that we talked about with this is that through schooling, or whether someone schools themselves, that talent isn't just about what you learn. It's that you have the ability to learn without being taught, that you can go find ways to learn a skill. And then once you learn that skill, that you know how to communicate it and teach it to somebody else for them to understand. And we really got in this discussion about communication a number of times during this conversation, because there's so many times that we think we've communicated, but someone on the other side hasn't received the communication in the way that we intended, and how there are ways to do it. And we talked about how he started expanding his skill in this, is that as a programmer himself, that he would go and program, then someone would review it, tell him where the flaws were, he'd go program again because he just loved the program. But he had watched the people around him, and there was somebody else that he worked with that actually went and questioned people and got what was important to them before he started developing, and how that actually saved him time in the long run. And so the way, and I think this is really important, that when we identify there's a gap in us, so even though David had the strength of programming, but he realized he had a gap of communication. And one of the things that he did was, instead of taking his next role in programming, he took it as a technical writer so that he could learn how to write communication so that people did build product in the right way. But he also took in all of the pain points that they were trying to solve and make sure to write it in a way that gained agreement. And so when we're trying to communicate, we can leave a communication where everyone walks away and says they agree. But until we confirm that agreement, and confirming that agreement in writing and doing it in writing in an effective way, is really, really important. That this skill of technical writing means that you have to be able to write it so that anyone can understand it. And that teaches us another way of communication when we have to write things in that way. And I know I went through this when early on in my career, where I was writing QuickBooks technical manuals, and I realized like the detail that you had to go through in order to give instructions on how to do anything in a software is very, very specific, and you have to be very clear in your communication, else people can't do what they intend to do. And so this is a really important skill to think about. And if you've got a gap, how do you go learn it? How do you put yourself in something uncomfortable that might not be natural to you in order to do that? And his point here, and I thought this was a really good line that he said, was being right doesn't matter if there isn't consensus. So a lot of times we go into these discussions and we believe we know the right way, and we might know the right way. But if we haven't gained consensus in the conversation and agreement, it doesn't matter, because no one thinks we have the right way. So until we gain agreement, we can't actually move forward in a way that's going to solve anything for everyone. So we also talked about Expensify and how all of that got started. And I really thought, though, it was such an important thing that we talked about, where he talked about that really the whole purpose of why he started it was to help the homeless and find a way to give them money but that they're spending it in the right way, on the right things, and it's not just giving them money and it going toward harm. So, because of him going through the process of trying to figure out what that is, and I think this happens a lot in business, is we have an intention of what the business is and what we want to create. We go through that process of designing it. It doesn't necessarily work out where he wasn't getting the backing to do what he wanted to do. So then we're kind of left with to stop and review and say, what else could this thing do? How else could I create what I have started, the knowledge I've put into it, the investment I've put into it, but is there another way to use it? And I think that's an entrepreneurial mindset that instead of giving up on something, instead of walking away completely, that we actually look at what's worked about it, what hasn't worked about it, and can we get there in another way? And as you saw in this story, he has gotten there in another way. So he got there by creating a product that did have use for users. So you had to make sure you had the market for it using the same type of concept that he had created. But because he has it, he is able to still fulfill his dreams of giving back and doing it in ways through that same software to make sure that he's giving back to his community in the ways that he wants to give. And I think that's really important, that we've got a purpose beyond what we do every day, which makes it so much larger and so much more important. And I talked to him about just taking that step to starting a business from being a really someone that's a sole contributor, individual contributor. And he talked about the fact that success and failure looks the same until you get to the end of it and you've actually succeeded. And it's so true, because we make a decision to do something and we're so excited to get started. And that first day, we're celebrating all these great ideas. But then we have to go to the next day and the next day and bump into the issues along the way and have the problems that we have to get over, rejection that might come over time, negativity that we have to get past. And we have to have the belief that the overall concept and value of what we are creating is important and it's worth it to keep working toward, even if we have to shift things along the way. And so we really talked about these concepts of talent, which we talked about, of being able to learn on your own and then be able to communicate it. And then we also talked about ambition being a very big core value that he wants to know that the people that work at Expensify have. And there's a way for us to know what it is that to live a good life, and trying to make sure that we know what we want in life. And so even if we can't answer it, that we have a belief that there's something bigger that we want to do. And we keep striving toward that until we can see it, until we can envision it. And the third big value that he talked about besides talent and ambition was humility, and making sure that you always have this appreciation of others. And there's not ego involved. When we see the ego coming up in the workplace or in the things that we do, a lot of times we get in the way of innovation and get in the way of everybody's talent that contributes to the end game that we want. So it's really important that as we go through this, I think these three values of his and Expensify are so important to make sure that you are focused on the right things. And his tagline of living rich, having fun, and saving the world while you go do it is to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and that you're enjoying the life that you have, but you also have that bigger purpose of how you give back and how you make a difference. And we ended really with just understanding that mindset is something that is up to us, that no one else can set our mindset for us, that it's really important that we're making sure that we are living a good life, that no one is going to make sure we are unless we do that. And to take moments to stop and think about these concepts in everything that we do, and ensuring that we are making a difference, in even if it's in small ways with our family and in bigger ways in business, whatever it is, that we can identify what those things are so that we feel appreciation for each day and making sure it's not just happening to us, that we're actually living with intention. And that is so important when we talk about the energy that we create and that we think about that energy for ourselves and making sure we're creating that energy for those around us. So if you want to learn more about Expensify, which they have so much to offer, so it's really worth spending a little time of how it can save you time in your businesses and with your clients, that you can go and learn more about them and how they manage money, whether that is with corporate cards, expense tracking, next day reimbursement, invoicing, bill pay, global reimbursement, and travel booking. So to learn more about them and how they can save you time and money, check out use.expensify.com/spend management. And again, that URL will be in the show notes. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and were able to take away a lot of life lessons like I was able to from David's story. And subscribe to this podcast so that you're notified the next great conversation and life story that we talk about, so that you can learn from that and keep creating more intention and better energy for yourself and those around you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.